In late 2025, Marco Rubio, America's Secretary of State, took a step that deeply alarmed Turkey, not because of what he said in public, but because of what his actions revealed behind the scenes. A network of new military facilities across Greece, deeper energy corridors bypassing Turkey entirely, and a growing pattern that looks less like coincidence and more like a deliberate blueprint to replace Ankara as Washington's anchor in the Eastern Mediterranean. Most people are still watching the headlines. They're missing the map. And now, with the Iran crisis exposing which allies move fast and which ones hold back, Rubio's blueprint no longer looks theoretical. It looks like a strategy being tested in real time. But here's what most analysts overlook. Rubio did not start studying the Eastern Mediterranean after taking office. He had already spent years building a framework for this region, long before he ever walked into the State Department. The alliances he is strengthening today, the bases being expanded, the energy deals being fast-tracked, none of this is reactive. It was designed. And if you step back and look at the map, the architecture becomes unmistakable. Each facility, each corridor, each diplomatic pressure point, placed deliberately around Turkey's periphery. At first glance, these look like separate events, but they are not. They are pieces of a larger blueprint, one designed to stabilize the Eastern Mediterranean without letting NATO fracture from within. For decades, the region's security architecture leaned heavily on one country, Turkey. Rubio seems to be testing a different model. What if the Eastern Mediterranean could be stabilized through multiple pillars of power? And what if Greece became the most reliable one? In this video, we explore Rubio's secret blueprint and why it could reshape the entire Eastern Mediterranean. Marco Rubio's story does not begin in Washington. It begins in Miami. His parents were Cuban immigrants who arrived in the United States after the rise of Fidel Castro. For Rubio, the idea that authoritarian regimes could reshape the world overnight was not an abstract theory. It was part of his family history. Growing up in that environment left a deep mark on his political thinking. From very early in his career, Rubio developed a worldview built around one central idea: power vacuums are dangerous. If democratic alliances weaken, authoritarian powers move in. That belief shaped his rise through American politics, first as Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives, then as a U.S. Senator, and eventually as one of Washington's most active voices on foreign policy and national security. But here's what many people either forgot or never noticed. Rubio didn't just study the Eastern Mediterranean, he legislated it into American strategy. In 2019, he co-introduced the Eastern Mediterranean Security and Energy Partnership Act with Bob Menendez. That bill was a major signal. It strengthened the U.S. strategic framework with Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, while also hardening the message to Turkey as Ankara pursued the Russian S-400 system. That moment mattered because it revealed Rubio's method. He was not merely responding to crises, he was re-engineering the strategic map of the region. And then came what we can call the August pivot. Through direct late 2025 communications with Athens, Rubio effectively abandoned decades of American Aegean neutrality. The State Department's new doctrine treats Greek soil, specifically the expanding footprint from Suda Bay to Alexandroupolis, not just as Allied territory, but as the ultimate undisputed staging ground for U.S. hard power in the region, completely bypassing the Bosphorus. The signs had been building for years. Natural gas discoveries were reshaping the energy map, and Rubio saw Greece sitting at the crossroads. Russia's posture in Syria had changed the military equation, and Rubio watched Turkey hedge its bets. China was pushing infrastructure influence into Europe, and Rubio noticed which allies pushed back and which ones didn't. Turkey's foreign policy had become more independent, more transactional, and for Rubio, less predictable meant less reliable. His approach operates on three pressure points simultaneously: controlling the Aegean security environment so Greek-Turkish tensions never spiral out of control, leveraging defense technology restrictions, particularly the F-35, as a management tool over Ankara, and positioning Greece at the center of every new energy corridor. Each one reinforces the other. So Rubio began asking a different question. What if the Eastern Mediterranean no longer had to depend so heavily on one strategic pillar? What if Washington could build a regional architecture around several dependable centers instead? That is where the triangle starts to emerge. Greece, Cyprus, Israel. Three states whose cooperation could anchor a different balance. But that immediately creates the next question. If Rubio is building a stronger map around Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, where exactly does that leave Turkey? For Washington, the Greece-Turkey rivalry has always been one of NATO's most dangerous internal contradictions. Both countries are NATO members, both control strategic geography, both have major militaries, and both have been clashing for years over who controls what in the sea and the air, from maritime zones and islands to airspace and migration pressure. Even though the two sides keep talking, the main disputes are still unresolved. In 2025, Athens strongly rejected Turkey's new maritime map, and in early 2026, Greece made clear it still intends to expand its territorial waters, despite Turkey's long-standing warning that such a move could lead to war. Rubio understood something essential about this rivalry. The United States cannot afford to lose either country, but it also cannot pretend the strategic equation is the same as it was 20 years ago. Over the last decade, Greece has become far more valuable to Washington than many old assumptions allowed. It is politically aligned with the West, deeply integrated into NATO structures, increasingly central in U.S. defense cooperation, and now being openly discussed by American officials as an energy gateway into Europe. In November 2025, Ambassador Kimberly Guilfoyle said the United States was eager to deepen energy ties with Greece and position it as a key route for gas and infrastructure into Europe. Turkey, by contrast, remains indispensable but harder to manage. Its geography is still extraordinary, its military is still huge, its access to the Black Sea, Middle East, and Caucasus still matters enormously. But Ankara's independent line, especially the S-400 purchase and recurring friction with Greece, has made Washington far less comfortable with a Turkey-centered regional model. Rubio's own actions show the tension. On one hand, he moved U.S.-Greek ties forward with Jared Petraitis. On the other, he pledged full U.S. support to Turkey after the Iranian missile attack on March 4, 2026. That is classic balance of power management, not emotional favoritism. So Rubio's thesis seems to be this: do not abandon Turkey, but never again let the region depend so heavily on Turkey alone. If Greece becomes stronger, if Cyprus remains inside the strategic framework, and if Israel stays deeply engaged, the U.S. gains options it did not fully have before. And that is exactly the scenario that triggered backlash in Ankara in late 2025. Turkish officials and state-aligned narratives increasingly portrayed the U.S.-Greek build-out and energy alignment as an effort to undercut Turkey's leverage inside NATO and the Eastern Mediterranean. You can see the same reaction pattern in Turkey's response to Greek Chevron activity south of Crete, which Ankara called unlawful, and in its broader objections to Greek maritime moves. From Ankara's perspective, Rubio's map is not neutral management, it is a shift in the regional center of gravity. That is why Rubio's doctrine is not really about choosing Greece over Turkey. It is about building a multi-pillar architecture of stability in which Turkey remains important, but no longer irreplaceable. Because doctrines are meaningless unless they come with tools. When we talk about power, we usually think about bases, pipelines, and governments. But another force quietly shapes the world too. Capital. Money flowing to the businesses that are growing fastest. And that is exactly why Scramble caught my attention. Scramble is a platform that connects everyday people with consumer goods brands in Europe that are looking for growth capital. In simple words, many people can put in small amounts, and Scramble helps direct that money into different selected brands, so you do not have to spend hours trying to decide on your own where to place it. And because Scramble puts up to 20% of its own money into every round, I personally feel more comfortable knowing they also have their own capital exposed alongside everyone else's. And it is impressive that over 36.8 million euros has already been invested in brands through the platform, with more than 10,600 active investors and an average annual interest income of 16.54%. Another thing I like is that you do not need a lot of money to begin. You can start from as little as 10 euros, which makes it far more accessible for someone who wants to begin with a smaller amount. Of course, there is always risk, which is why opportunities like this usually make more sense as part of a broader portfolio together with other assets. So your money is spread more wisely across different options instead of relying too heavily on one place alone. If you want to check it out, new users can get a special bonus through my link under the video or by using this QR code. You receive 10 euros when you register, and then an extra 5 euros for every 100 euros you put in. If Rubio's blueprint is going to work, 3 switches have to stay under control at the same time. And if even one flips the wrong way, the entire regional balance becomes unstable. The first switch is the Aegean security environment. This is the most dangerous one because it is the easiest to ignite. The Aegean is not just a political disagreement, it is an active pressure zone, packed with fighter aircraft, warships, patrol vessels, and constant military monitoring. In such an environment, a crisis can start before diplomacy even has time to react. A bad interception, a maritime incident, or a sudden show of force can push both sides into escalation far faster than most outsiders realize. For Rubio, this is the nightmare scenario, because the moment the Aegean turns hot, his whole regional design comes under threat. The United States would no longer be managing competition. It would be trying to stop a military crisis between 2 NATO members while the entire Eastern Mediterranean watches. That is why the first rule of Rubio's blueprint is simple. Keep the Aegean from becoming the spark that burns everything else down. The second switch is defense leverage. This is where Rubio's worldview becomes very visible. Turkey's S-400 decision changed the equation, and Rubio understood exactly how to use it. Being frozen out of the F-35 path and facing sanctions consequences means Ankara cannot modernize on its preferred terms unless relations improve. For Rubio, that gives the US a way to shape Turkish behavior without fully severing ties. At the same time, it increases the value of Greece as the more predictable military partner inside NATO's southeastern flank. And Greece has not wasted that opening. Its recent procurement path tells the story. Rafale jets from France, F-16, Viper upgrades from the United States, frigate programs aligned with European defense standards. Every purchase signals the same thing to Washington. This is a partner that stays inside Western systems. For Rubio, that contrast with Turkey's S-400 gamble could not be sharper. The third switch is energy and infrastructure. Energy corridors create permanence, governments change, tactical alliances shift, but ports, LNG terminals, transmission links, logistics routes, and offshore concessions can lock in geopolitical relationships for decades. In November 2025, Reuters reported that the United States wanted deeper energy ties with Greece and saw it as a key energy gateway to Europe, with the vertical gas corridor playing a central role. In February 2026, Turkey openly attacked Greece's energy moves south of Crete involving Chevron, which shows that even commercial activity is now part of the geopolitical contest. And this is the hidden logic of Rubio's blueprint. Prevent an Aegean explosion, use defense leverage to constrain Turkish unpredictability, and help build infrastructure that makes Greece more central to the future map of the region. That is not just diplomacy, that is strategic engineering, which is why the final question matters so much. Why, in Rubio's eyes, is Greece becoming the anchor? By the way, 85% of you watching haven't subscribed. If you appreciate deep dive geopolitical analyses, hit like and subscribe. It helps us make more videos like this. Marco Rubio does not view Greece as just another friendly country in the Eastern Mediterranean. He sees it as a dependable anchor in a region where relying too heavily on one power has become a strategic liability. That is a major shift. For decades, Washington defaulted to Turkey. Rubio's framework demands something different, not just size, but reliability under pressure. And when he looks at the map, Greece keeps appearing in places that matter. Suda Bay gives the U.S. Navy its deepest operational reach in the eastern Mediterranean. Alexandroupolis opens a logistics corridor into the Balkans and the Black Sea without touching the Bosphorus. The defense relationship has expanded from joint exercises to embedded operational access. The energy vertical corridor through Greece is becoming the alternative pipeline route that bypasses both Russia and Turkey. But the strongest proof came in the last days, during the Iran crisis. When the United States needed immediate operational support, Greece moved fast. It provided access to its airspace, ports, and bases, giving U.S. forces the ability to use Greek territory before and during the conflict. Only days later, Rubio welcomed Greek Foreign Minister Georgios Geropetritis for high-level talks, openly emphasizing Greece's role as a reliable strategic partner. That matters far more than another diplomatic statement, because in geopolitics, alliances are judged in moments of pressure, and this is where the contrast becomes important. While Greece offered immediate support, other European allies were more hesitant. Some kept their distance, others imposed limits. Turkey, despite its size and strategic position, did not allow the use of its territory for the same operations. For Rubio, this kind of moment confirms something he has been moving toward for years. The Eastern Mediterranean should not depend so heavily on one strategic pillar. It should rest on a wider framework of dependable partners. The Greece-Cyprus-Israel-US framework was never just about symbolism or good political chemistry. It was about building a structure that connects defense, energy, infrastructure, and logistics into one stable system. If those links become strong enough, Washington gains something it has often lacked in this region: options. Turkey still matters. Rubio knows that. But his broader thesis seems to be that the region cannot remain hostage to the mood swings or strategic calculations of one country alone. And that is exactly why Greece is becoming so important in Rubio's eyes. Not because Greece replaces Turkey, but because Greece gives the United States something it values more and more: strategic predictability. When Washington starts building around reliability instead of habit, countries like Greece stop looking like supporting players. They start looking like anchors. And in geopolitics, predictability is power. Marco Rubio did not arrive at the State Department with an empty notebook. He arrived with years of thinking about the Eastern Mediterranean already behind him. And that is exactly why this matters. Because this is no longer just about one politician's ideas. Washington is increasingly moving in the same direction: deeper ties with reliable regional partners, stronger U.S.-Greek cooperation, and a strategic map built around stability, access, and energy security. And this is not a partisan project. The framework Rubio built with Menendez in 2019 has only deepened. Greece is no longer a secondary player. It is a serious strategic asset. So this blueprint is bigger than Rubio himself. It is about alliances, bases, energy corridors, and a new balance in which America keeps Turkey in the system, but no longer allows the system to depend on Turkey alone. If that strategy holds, Greece becomes the anchor of a new American order in the Eastern Mediterranean, and Turkey is managed, not relied upon. If it fractures, the Aegean becomes the most dangerous fault line in NATO. Because in this region, geography does not change. Only the balance of power does. And Rubio's blueprint may help shape that balance for years to come. Special thanks to Scramble for making this analysis possible. If you're serious about building a great financial future, be sure to check them out in the description below. The story does not end here. Watch the videos on your screen now. They continue from Rubio's strategy and Greece's rising role to what could come next in the Greece-Turkey power game.